6, and it's 8 p.m. in the studios at Q95, the big station. We're live on our radio frequencies and on QTV. Please follow us on Facebook and on YouTube at Q95 FM Radio. Share the live, like our pages, or on your phone numbers or on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q95 because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, love, peace, prosperity, and unity among our Kalinago and Afro Caribbean brothers and sisters. This is, in fact, our 12th Global View on Q show for 2026, and we continue to engage with our local, regional, and global Q family listeners and friends of Dominica. I'm Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. With me is my co host, Justice Dr. Irving Andrick, former IMF economist and UWP leader Dr. Thompson Fontaine, businessman Anderson Jolly, Miss Maslin Edwards, and political scientist Dr. Dion George. Good evening to all you gentle people. Tonight we turn our attention to the recent IMF report on Dominica and to the battle for Dominica's resources. How foreign companies are fighting to enrich themselves at the expense of Dominicans. So here are some talking points. Is Hayden's company taking Dominica to court? Is a tram company gearing to sell Dominica's passports? Did a Canadian couple in Sofia die simply because they and their clients were using a road Dominicans have used for decades? And now the IMF country report on Dominica reveals some findings and raises some major questions. It says growth momentum is expected to ease over the medium term, with risks being tilted to the downside. Additional fiscal consolidation is needed to reduce debt vulnerabilities, reinforce the currency union, and strengthen disaster resilience. A multi-pronged strategy to broaden revenues and rationalize spending can reduce fiscal imbalances while safeguarding priority investments to support resilient and inclusive growth. Addressing balance sheet vulnerabilities, modernizing regulatory frameworks, and easing long-standing structural constraints to support sustainable credit growth remain priorities. A wide-ranging structural reform agenda is needed to strengthen economic resilience and ease impediments to growth potential. Institutional frameworks should be enhanced to better support policy formulation, monitoring, and implementation. Is what the report does not say more revealing than what it actually says out loud? The ECCB has confirmed that an entity operating as SK, an online media bank, is not licensed under the Banking Act of 2015 for St. Christopher and Nevis. Could that be happening in Dominica? What can the ECCB do about that? Is any government going to be allowed to convert substantial overdraft at a bank to loans and still secure the same amount in overdraft thereafter from the same bank? And can any government borrow indiscriminately from Social Security and pay back in bonds or whatever? When last did the Dominica Social Security publish an annual report anyway? What can the ECCB do about any of that? Meantime, what does all of this tell us about the management of Dominica's economy? Why is it being proposed that we have to still tighten our belts even more than we have already done? Why are we being warned about our spending, our national debt, our exports, our healthcare, our cost of living, and about deficits in local industries? And what does it tell us about Dominica's current leadership and about our leadership over the past 25 years? And what do we suggest about the way forward for Dominica's economy, for the people's well-being, for our healthcare, our education, a lack of knowledge and technical industries, agriculture and agribusiness, and other sectoral industries? So we look forward to the contributions of Justice Dr. Irving Andrick, former IMF economist and UWP leader Dr. Thompson Fontaine, businessman Anderson Jolly, Miss Maslin Edwards, and political scientist Dr. Dion George, on the recent IMF country report on Dominica and the battle for Dominica's resources. Of foreign companies are fighting to enrich themselves at the expense of Dominicans. So, as usual, we invite you, our Q family and friends of Dominica, to help us give our usual huge shout out and big thank you to our farmers, our healthcare providers, frontline workers, police and fire officers, teachers, doctors, nurses, public and private sector patriots, and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. We welcome each and every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are, in every nook and cranny, in every village, in every community at home in Dominica, in the region or globally. Thank you, Sherwin, for keeping us on the air. Thank you, Lambi, on the console, directing the traffic. We will take your calls. As you know, the people's voice is always a priority on the Global View on Q. As usual, each panelist tonight will divide their contributions into 4 5-minute presentations, and we'll get to make a closing remark. So I go now to Justice Dr. Irving Andre for his first 5-minute comments on tonight's topic. Dr. Andre?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. G. Let me say welcome to the fellow panelists. Quite an esteemed panel you have this evening. Let us thank Lambi and Sherwin and your listeners for taking the time off to listen to something, hopefully, which will have some morsel of significance to them. These are difficult times. We're being asked to tighten our belts, those of us on the ground. But as we tighten the belts, if we have one, you have foreigners who are loosening their belts to accommodate the wealth generated by Dominican taxpayers and enriching them in the most vulgar of fashions. You have, for example, the latest episode of this groveling, this insane wastage, not just wastage, this loss of our sovereign wealth. When you have two companies, the MMCE, whatever the name is, who was granted an exclusive contract to sell certain types of passports. Now is in arbitration with Dominica. Why? Because this Trump company, whatever the name is, under the table. Remember how the Taiwanese were betrayed with a trip to Barbados years ago? So this Trump company has been given, despite that exclusivity, which was given to MMCE, they now were given under the table similar rights to sell Dominican passports, whatever the value is right now. So MMMC is vexed. MMC said, I'm not taking that. MMC said, let me drag Dominica into arbitration. MMC said, we can't guarantee what will happen to the passport. The only thing landed in that airport will probably be labels or whatever else. But there is a threat. And if that threat comes to fruition, then I have to ask ourselves, what of Wesley? What of the misappropriation of lands of Dominicans? You see, Dominicans are always those who have to give while the foreign companies receive. What about those who have not even been paid? But we've seen this rodeo before. Wasn't there a fight a few years ago with someone called Zampoli? He's now Dominica's ambassador, fighting for his share of 30 million pieces of silver in a lawsuit filed in New York? Wasn't there that situation, quite frankly? Wasn't there a situation where a foreign company was given $9.4 million in tax refunds? And Dominicans have to pay every penny they can on every barrel they import to help alleviate hunger and suffering in their own country? Huh? This is what's happening. The wealth of Dominica is being frittered away. It's being given away. And whose belts are going to be tightened? Well, every minister of government? Huh? The landlord's belts with $65,000 rammed into or under that belt, even in the crutches of wealth. These folks are the ones who are going to tighten their belts. What about the duty-free concessions to the consigliaries? What about the no bid contracts given to foreign people? What about a company that is crucifying debauch? Many of you went to church on Good Friday. Many of you sang, "Behold, behold," in great reverence. But you refuse to behold the atrocities being perpetrated on Dominica. You have apologists, you have accomplices. Academics talking about debauch is not bad. A 300 feet hole in the ground. Zebra will fill that up. Why are you worried, you Dominicans? Why should you be worried about the desecration and exploitation of your own country? You think you could do that in China? Who is benefiting from these things? Who benefited from the $200 to $300 million spent on geothermal energy? Who received kickbacks, whether to study or to build edifices around Dominica? Who received a contract for 25 years with a guaranteed rate of return, a foreign company? Who is going to pay the cost of geothermal? Some people are proclaiming with great righteousness, "Oh, the dawn has come. Geothermal, Dominica is saved." Huh? Dominica will not see a penny in terms of the decrease in the rate of electricity in Dominica, because it has all been frittered away to foreign companies. What about the travesty in Soufriere? The murder of 2 hoteliers. They were being prevented from using a road which people in that Soufriere area used for decades. So allegedly a foreign entity comes in, takes upon himself to take that road and prevent people from using a road they have used for generations. Dominica is not even for sale. It is for free. It is for the theft which has been allowed. And the investigations, what of the investigations? What of the investigations into that collapse of that roof of that school being built? What about the investigation of Jollies, for God's sakes? And the disappearance of items for sale? What are the fruits of that independence, of that investigation? Dominica, unfortunately, is at a state where, quite frankly, everything is being frittered away. The IMF comes in and listen to their language, you know. Listen, is the biggest crap you can think of. Fiscal consolidation is needed to reduce debt vulnerabilities. C'est ça, you gotta do, sir. The simple meaning of it is you have to start cutting jobs. You have to start cutting wages so that you can pay the amount of mountains of debt that you have. But they ain't telling you that. They couch it under this diplomatic language that only Thompson Falcon can understand. Fiscal consolidation at you is needed to reduce debt vulnerabilities. Rationalized spending is required. Huh? What rationalized spending? What about your NEP that you boast about? Rationalized spending, you can coupe it chui, according to a fellow from Portsmouth. That is the state of affairs in Dominica as we speak. It is the most vulnerable who will bear the brunt of those disastrous economic policies in Dominica. Not those who are among the panelists this evening, Mr. G. It is those who can ill afford or least afford to put the necessities of life on the table, to send their children to school, to pay their bills, to pay their mortgage, and so on. These are the ones who will bear the brunt of these measures being proposed. So when these folk talk about tighten our belts, you hear any prime minister talk about reducing his income? You hear any prime minister talk about reducing his rent? You hear any prime minister talk about the vehicles that he has and he uses, 10 or 12? You hear any minister talking about those things? No. Those who have to be tightening their belts are the people who can least afford it. But we will continue to sing, Behold, behold, this is the coming of the cross. In Jesus' name we pray. That is my 5 minutes.
Thank, thank you so much, Dr. Henry, for your opening comments here. You know, I'm happy that we have Dr. Thompson Fontaine with us tonight because Thompson, really and truly, you've been there and done that. You've been to the IMF. You see how the reports come. I mean, is in fact you can summarize for us what is in there and what in fact it says and in fact what it does not say, or in other words, in the way that Justice Dr. Andre put it, it's saying one thing, but maybe there's a deeper meaning inside of what it's saying. So maybe you can summarize for us what this report is all about and what it is that we really need to do to get out of that thing. You needed to,
A very good night to you, Sheridan, of course, and to Dr. Andre, to Marcelin, to Dr. Dion, and to Mr. Jolly. It's great to be in such great company tonight, and of course to the listeners. You know, when I look at the IMF report, I see quite frankly a very frank report. They're ready to the government to task. The government cannot look at this report and feel comfortable, because the IMF is telling them quite clearly that they continue to violate their own rules that they have set for themselves. This government has set what we call a fiscal rule, and one of those rules is to keep down expenditure, to keep the deficit at a certain level. In other words, they are not supposed to spend more than they're making, whether it's out of CBI or out of taxes. They're supposed to keep that to about 2% of GDP, roughly $60 million. Instead, they have trebled that. They have now gone 400% of what that level should have been. And the IMF is saying that they are not transparent. They're asking the government to be more transparent in their reporting of what is going on in the country. They've also taken them to task. If you look at the last paragraph of the report, it says very clearly that the statistics in this country is horrible. There are weaknesses in current account statistics, in government fiscal statistics, in price statistics, in census. All of the data that you need for policy making is not prevalent in Dominica, and that is a huge concern. In other words, the government, they are making policy, but they do not have the data to support it. You know, when I worked in government many years ago, and I worked in the statistics department, we were very proud of the statistics that we produced. We did price statistics. We did a regular population census. People had those numbers. We did poverty reports, labor force surveys. This government has removed practically all of those reported. They have gotten rid of labor reports that tells you what's the unemployment rate. They have gotten rid of the price. You used to hear price reports every month. We used to publish the price levels every month. That was made public. You cannot get this information any longer. You cannot get any information on government spending in between the budgets. That is not available. So they're hiding data, they're hiding statistics, and the IMF rightly called them out. And that's one of the high points to me of this report. The fact that it calls out this government clearly in terms of what they're hiding, what they're not telling the public. And in fact, there is a line I want to read from this report, which I found was very interesting. And they're in fact calling for, it says, persistent weaknesses in public financial management systems risk compromising the operationalizing of the fiscal rule and disaster self-insurance mechanisms. Now, that is very important. Dominicans have been talking about the World Bank housing, right? After the disaster, after the hurricane that we had in 2018. And a number of persons thought that was really the World Bank giving us assistance. Well, it is true, it came from the World Bank, but that is part of a disaster insurance program that the government of Dominica has been paying into. Okay, so you pay into this insurance program, and when there is a major disaster, as we have, then you get some recovery from it. And that's how those houses came about. They're now saying that because of the carelessness of this government, that we risk even that insurance scheme that covers people. So in other words, if we have, God forbid, there is another major disaster like we have, because it appears to me from the language that they're using that they may not be keeping up with their payments, it would mean that if there's another disaster, we will not be able to get the assistance that we're getting now from the World Bank that allows people to rebuild their homes and so on. And although the government tried to pass it out as if it was theirs, but that was really an insurance payout that they were getting. But these are some of the weaknesses and the issues that we have. And finally, in terms of the overall reporting, it is true that it talks about growth for that period or last year, 4.2% growth, but that is based on tourism numbers, literally cruise ship visitors coming into the country and investment programs like the airport. Now, if you know the way this program functions, the majority of the resources coming into the country goes straight back out, because employing those programs are foreigners. The majority of workers in the airport are foreigners. I think up to 95% of persons employed there are foreign workers. So yes, it is true. Our investment capital is going up because an international airport is a major investment program, and investment is a critical component of the gross domestic product of a country. But when you think about the impact that it is having, it is not widespread. For example, and I always use the example of agriculture. Where you have growth in agriculture, it impacts every single Dominican. Because when the farmer gets money from the sale of his agricultural produce, he goes to the local shop to buy a soft drink or to buy some back and egg or whatever, sardines or whatever he buys from the shop. And he enables the shopkeeper. The shopkeeper then takes that money and goes into town to buy clothing for the children or to take a trip overseas. The money is spreading, the money is moving through the economy. But with that kind of investments that we've seen lately, it is not really benefiting the average person. Hence the reason why under this government, we continue to get poorer and poorer, and we continue to do worse than we've done ever under any government, anytime in this country.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for that, Dr. Fountain Fontaine. We'll come back to you in a minute. I know you have a lot more to contribute to this discussion here tonight. I want to go to businessman Andy Jolly, because you can give us from a businessman's perspective, what is the state of things in Dominica? I mean, Thompson mentioned the question of, in terms of GDP, the investments, airport and so on, but I mean, it's not widespread. There's not investment spread into manufacturing or agriculture or agribusiness or tech or knowledge industries and so on. What are your thoughts on what you're reading out of this IMF report, Andy?
Well, the IMF report was one that was very interesting. And first of all, I want to say good night to all the panelists on there. You have a very large panel tonight, so you're going to get a lot of diverse ideas. But I also wanted to say, Mr. Irvin, what's ZEP-bound is the only thing. I didn't know what ZEP-bound was because I'm a little young. So next time you come on, you have to tell us what ZEP-bound growing in the bush is going to be like, because some of the young people listening to the program might not know. And whatever's going to land on the airstrip as well, maybe you should tell us that again. I don't remember what it was. But listening to the report, or looking at the report and listening to the way that the Prime Minister took that report to heart I would say it was very familiar, because this was what he normally does. The report clearly says, here's what I recommend that you should do. And with total disregard for that report, he went ahead and said, oh, the report says one thing, but here's what we're going to do. And total disregard for something that is structural, something that's well researched, something that is familiar to all the intellects. And for him to just literally take that report and disregard it without even, I would say, approaching some of the items on there was just, it just blew my mind. It just simply blew my mind to say, hey, the report says we should do this, but here's what we're going to do, or here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do exactly what they said. I'm going to follow my own direction. And the question is, are we willing as Dominicans to trust that direction? And does that direction that he's taken, has that direction been proven anywhere before? And from what I understand, for him to question the intellectuals that even wrote the report, and Dr. Fontaine explained to us a while ago, is crazy. Because I would like to see his knowledge base on leading a financial team. I'd really like to see his knowledge base on understanding financial information. But where we have somebody telling us, no, I'm not going to listen. I'm going to lead you with what I know or the little that I've seen. So how it's affecting us as a business person, I want to bring that to the table. Business is something that's very structural. We all know that the economy of Dominica is not one that's very strong. And then recently I was on a show a little earlier this week, and I talked about the banking system. And we can see why the banking system in Dominica is not a very strong one and is not structured towards lending, because the ideas coming from our prime minister at the top says, yes, we've borrowed people's money, but I am going to tell them what I'm going to do with the money, or I'm going to tell them when I'm going to pay it back, or if I'm even going to pay it back. And this is a very scary approach for a lot of the business people. I can tell you personally that a lot of the business people that I've talked to in Dominica are a little concerned, because they're like, well, wait, prices are going up. And I know that the government of Dominica recently gave some discounts to people who want to buy sardines, and if you want to buy mackerel and maybe tuna in can. But most healthy people don't eat that. Most healthy people don't eat the things that they actually gave subsidies on. So our prices are going up. The banking structure is getting tougher. The monetary system is not there. Not only that, we're caught up in Dominica in a few different messes that is making it tight for us to do business with the outside world. Our freight systems recently increased our freight cost to Dominica significantly. The question becomes, in a month or two, how are we able to go ahead and continue our business? But I want to bring it out to everybody out there. Let's not just look at it as doing business in Dominica. Let's look at Dominica itself as a product. Let's look at Dominica and the fact that we have exports that we are going to send out. Well, if you increase the cost in Dominica for everybody in Dominica, those exports have to increase. And the question is, how competitive are the Dominican products going to be with the rest of the world? So here it is that we're not really competitive already. We're just trying to get by. Our agricultural base is not very strong. And here it is that we don't have a very high manufacturing capacity in Dominica. We really don't have factories, warehouses that produce anything. And the only people that are left to pay for whatever Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit plans for us in the future is the people or the business people of Dominica. Because where else are you going to get this money? It has to come from tax revenue. It has to come from the pockets of the Dominican people. Mr. Skerrit understands that his $600,000 house per year should have said, let's go ahead and reduce that, and maybe I should get a smaller place to live. Maybe the cars that he drives, like we mentioned earlier, maybe instead of driving the gas guzzler or the other vehicles, maybe we should get something more energy efficient. Maybe we should change things around. But no, instead, he says, let's go full speed ahead. And I don't know what the plan is at the end of the rainbow, but somebody's going to have to tell us how it's going to work. But I don't have any optimism that it's going to work out well for the business people of Dominica. And I can tell you, as a business person in Dominica, we're suffering already as these things start. And as we see costs start to increase, we cannot necessarily increase the price because people in Dominica do not have the spender money that it's going to take for them to pay for the cost increase. So that's why I stand on it. I don't know what the result is. I'm very clueless on this decision that we've taken. I don't know what direction we're heading. So I'm sitting down here waiting. Maybe some of the other intellectuals on this panel can give us some better direction.
Thanks a lot, Andy. Marcelin, you spent practically, a good portion of your life in the private sector. Andy explained to us that this IMF report came out, and the leader of the country seems to be disregarding some of the recommendations in there, and what it has highlighted in there, and it is going into in a different direction, in his own direction, as he has done for the past 20 years. And where has that got us? So are we going to trust that direction from the leader of the country?
Thank you, Mr. G. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to you, Mr. G, too. The rest of the esteemed panel, the listening audience of Q95 Radio, particularly Dominicans at home and in the diaspora. First of all, let me give God thanks for being in the land of the living and for the clarity of my mind to guide my thought process on this evening's Global View program. It is indeed a privilege to be here with the rest of the esteemed panel. And I would like to say thank you. It is a learning process for me as well, because some of the language here is only Mr. Fountain who can, feed us. But I am here and I will do my best. As I said, it is a privilege to be part of this panel, part of this men group, which I embrace as the only woman. And not with gladness, but with the dignity of patriotic duty and a deep sense of civic obligation to speak not only as myself, Marcelin Edwards, but as the people of Concord, the Concord community, who support protecting the Debwash Mountain, the habitat of the Cicero and Jacko parrots, the home of the two main watersheds that feed the Pegua River that flows through my community. I will speak from a place of external, or, from an external place unrelated to me, as I choose to present in different capacities. I was in the private sector in Dominica, and that private sector was once a thriving sector. This was the best place to work, and I could not, if I had to do it again in Dominica, I would have chosen to work for the private sector. But with what we have seen in Dominica, we have seen a beat down of the private sector. We have seen a private sector that is struggling within the dead economy. I would like to say it is lethargic, but for me, it is dead. We have seen a lot of businesses come to a grinding close. They have closed their doors. And because of that, the private sector cannot really grow the economy, because when you have businesses that have really closed their doors, it means that their contribution to the economy is no longer there. Now you have contributions by way of Social Security, by way of taxes. They contributed to, by, the electricity company. They had to electrify the place. They had to. It's a lot of things that you have to do to run a business, and that contribution is significant to the economy. But how are we going to look at this economy and feel that it's an economy that, given that the present condition, the present crisis it is in, how are we going to look at it and say, well, it can be resuscitated under that same leadership, when you have a leadership who is in total disregard of professional reports that speak to means and ways of, growing the economy, bringing it back to something, the semblance of what it used to be, so Dominicans can work, Dominicans can enjoy a certain quality of life, or the quality of life that they once enjoyed. It is you're not going to get that under this leadership, because this man has always done what he wants to do. He's a man who is out of control. And we take, for example, he spent how much, like $600 and something thousand for electoral reform, when he paid that to Justice Byron. When the documents were submitted, what did he do? He discarded those recommendations to inject what satisfies him, just to corrupt the process. So he's an out of control man. And I don't think you can train that tree, that man, because he has grown set in those ways. And those ways have not really worked for the Dominican people. And you have a lot of unemployment, and that unemployment is driven by no jobs. The private sector cannot create the jobs to employ those persons, and the government itself is not creating any jobs for the citizens of the country. You have foreign companies. Foreign companies, I don't know on what type of contracts they have with those companies, but I don't understand what sort of leader would enter into a contract, into some form of arrangement with a foreign company and choose not to give your citizens the first choice of being hired. We have heard Roosevelt Skerritt when he said that Dominica exports. Well, the foreign companies, the foreign workers export over $215 million per year through Western Union and MoneyGram. And Dominicans can't even earn $1 from the very same companies. So if you export that type of money on a yearly basis, it means that there's no money in the economy. There's no money to sustain those institutions like the hospitals. There's no monies to put in place that would cushion anything for the Dominican people. Look at the hurricanes that we have had. When those hurricanes came, it was major to the infrastructure of Dominica. And we can consider those hurricanes to have had a catastrophic impact on Dominica's infrastructure. And I would want to draw reference to Maria. The liability was enormous. And any company would have collapsed under that type of catastrophe. And we are looking at the private sector and looking at the indigenous businesses that, were there for many years, contributing to the economy, that would have grown the economy if the government had, really plowed in some assistance to those companies. But this was not done. So you find that this private sector in Dominica right now, it is killing people. People are dying under the weight. You have mothers who cannot feed their children. You have employed mothers, professional women who work for meager wages under unfavorable work conditions. They cannot pay their mortgages. They can't keep a roof over their heads. They can't feed their family. So there was someone I know who left the government job and went to the private sector, went back in the private sector, want to work for herself. She went to planting vegetables. She went to doing, private nursing just to survive. And in that private sector where she's employed as a private nurse, she earns more money doing private nursing, working with the private sector and planting vegetables. So you see where she went back? She went back to the soil to plant vegetables to survive. And that is when she started realizing real money, monies that she hadn't earned while being employed as a professional. Meanwhile, her colleagues who remained in the workforce, they must climb the steps of the financial center to ask PM for cool out. Is that a government you want to work under? Is that a function? Can that government create anything for the private sector to thrive? A condition for the private sector to thrive when that very same government is competing against the private sector? You have, about 50 or so businesses shut their doors. And when those businesses shut their doors, then what did we do? Have we at any point in time done any analysis or, taken into consideration the 50 businesses and, comprise the figures, do the numbers as to the loss of those collective businesses to the economy? Because those 50 businesses that went out, they totally decimated the private sector. It put the private sector on its back. And I expect that situation in Dominica because you have the private sector that is there and it is responsible for growing the economy. So it's not really plowing in anything into the economy. The jobs that we have from the foreign companies, it is being outsourced to foreigners. So it's a bulk of the money going out of Dominica. So what was already created, in Dominica by the private sector, a bulk of that is not there. Take, for example, Ross University. Ross contributed a significant amount to Dominica's economy. You had First Domestic contributed a significant amount to the economy. First Domestic, Life of Barbados was the company, Surgical Life was the company I worked with. So Life of Barbados and, or Surgical Life is no longer there. So that company employed hundreds of workers. Now, with the removal of First Domestic, the government could have helped to keep that company afloat, to keep that company delivering on behalf of Dominicans, but they did not do that. And as a result, there was a domino effect. You had, the major liabilities that could not be paid because that company went under. So those major businesses they were employing people. People were paying their mortgages. People were earning. People were contributing to the tax system. They were contributing to Social Security. They were doing all of that. But when you remove those major businesses that would bring in, some of those businesses were bringing in like $32 million a year. So think of that extraction from the private sector in our economy. And then you have foreign companies taking the rest of the money and go. then what you expect? Dominicans are going to be on their knees. And I am telling you, I would not work in the private sector if I were in Dominica in that given situation, because I cannot see, how are you going to work in the private sector? I was in Dominica just recently, and one of the things I always do is go back to my place of employment. And I was asking, how is business? How is business? Last year, this 2025 fiscal year was the only year they did better, but it had been bad for the past 10 years. 10 years. So when companies operate under that lethargic economy, they cannot survive. And think of the indigenous companies in Dominica, where the head office is in Dominica, where they have no affiliations to bigger companies, internationally. So that IMF report, I think the situation is grim, but it is what the government has brought on Dominicans by decimating the private sector and destroying Dominica's economy.
Thanks a lot, Marceline, for these opening remarks.
Thank you.
You can mute your mic, Marceline. Dr. George, I want to come to you, but before I do that, I want to go back to Dr. Andre for a minute, because Marceline started putting our skin saying we haven't got enough women on the show.
I have an exact response from Marceline.
Yeah, well, give it to her.
A biblical platform. Let not your heart be troubled. You should be encouraged by the fact that it takes 5 muscular, bulking men to stand up to one woman.
Amen.
This is plain homage to you. So you should be very proud of that. It takes 5 to stand up to just one strong woman. In fact, you make me remember that song of Aretha Franklin. Come on, how it going again? You make me feel like a natural woman. And that's exactly what you are, a natural woman. Mr. G, am I right or wrong?
You're quite right. Now, the other thing to Dr. Andre, you've been to Dominica recently, right?
Yeah.
And you looked at, Marceline spoke about indigenous businesses. When you look around Roseau, what do you see?
Somebody would say that's an oxymoron. But let me address Mr. Jolly. He was wondering what I meant by the things landing on the airport. We see we have a local industry making small local planes, and those planes are otherwise known as labels. That it will be the only thing landing on that airport, quite frankly. Nothing else. And what about the people of Wesley who were dispossessed? And when we talk about debauch, you see, some of the apologists, Dr. Jolly, went and they were saying, oh, the nature will grow back. Sister, you there? But if it is true that they're digging holes hundreds of feet into the ground, how much zebgua? Zebgua is what my rabbits used to eat way back in the day, Mr. Jolly. We didn't have any fancy pharmacy then. How much zebgua you think will fill that hole? And you have so-called intelligent people talking that errant nonsense and trying to pull the wool over Dominica's eyes. Say, couloir Chevrolet. No, they're looking for copper. The Chinese are doing in Dominica what they've done elsewhere in Africa, all over the place, and destroy the environment in their efforts to do precisely that. And what is the unkindest cut of all? What is the dagger in your back? Is those who are enabling that activity are Dominicans themselves who stand to benefit. That's the problem.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. Lambi, you want us? Are you making a sign for something? No, not to us. All right. So, Dr. George, I'm going to come to you, but you've listened to Dr. Andre. You've listened to Dr. Fontaine give us a brilliant summary of the IMF report, and you read between the lines very effectively and identified what we were not doing in terms of what the report recommending. And your own thoughts on the situation that we now find ourselves in, well, vis-a-vis this report, but what the report entails. I mean, what the report is a reflection of what is going on in Dominica at this time and all of the shortcomings that we have, you know, the disastrous economy that we have. I mean, Dr. Fountain identified it very well. Dr. George, your thoughts?
Okay, good evening to the host, Mr. Sheridan Guegua, and of course to the co-host, Dr. Andre, to the only woman here, Mrs. Marceline Edwards, to Mr. Jolly, of course, to the opposition leader, Dr. Thompson Fountain. And so some of the things I'll be talking about, I will submit that Dr. Fountain worked with me on it. It had to do with my dissertation, and for that I appreciate. But I just want to start by saying something I read first thing this morning. It was the reading of the day, and it says that for what I received, I passed on to you. First importance, that Christ died for our sins and that he has risen from the dead. And so we are still in the Easter season. That's number one. The other thing I would say is that Mr. Gregoire, thank you, and Mr. Dr. Andre, thank you so much. Is Mr. Gregoire, when I am 4 minutes, please give me a little thumbs up that I know it's time to wrap up. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thanks. I would like to, first of all, say that I want to underscore Mr. Nassif today. I hope he doesn't mind me calling his name because I want to say it in a positive way. When he said that he's not embarrassed about speaking good of the government efforts after the hurricane. That's number one. I could say the same. I have a book I had in 2004 that I said that, yes, the IMF stabilization program was good. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it was after the UWP. And so I spoke towards the stabilization program. And yes, I mentioned the name of the prime minister for which he was elated. Yes, I will leave it as that. Tonight, my 5 minutes, I will touch on what I think some of the talking points were. One of the talking points was Anthony Hayden and taking Dominica to court. And I think that's a very, very serious matter to the point where one need to not only look at if hypothetical, that's the truth. And from information coming in, seemingly it's in arbitration stage, that's a concern. I just wanted to touch on that primarily. One, that's the danger of putting funds in foreign companies that should have been in our treasury. That's number one. Number two, there's a saying, someone give you a hamburger and then they want a pig back. There's a case in the United States called Citizen United versus the Election Federal Commission. And that was the issue, you know. How much money can big money put into elections? And the fear of that, just to make it clear, is, you know, Dominica say, who pay the pipers plays the tune. But it's more than that. It's they control your elections. They control, if Russia were to give, let's say, Trump money, and they know that Hillary is a better candidate, and they push in all that money in Trump campaign because Russia maybe have its own personal or private agenda. And so it's important that we do this constitutionally and by the law. That's my first point. The other point is, in a conceptual way, one has to consider the prime minister and how he came into office. It was not conventional. Consider we had lost two prime ministers prior. We had lost Rosie Douglas and we had lost Pierre Charles. And so, again, he broke a world record, one can consider. I think he was the youngest prime minister ever. Now, one can look at a positive side and say, oh my God, this is wonderful. Or one can question his experience or perhaps qualification. And so these are the objective way that a scientist look at these matters. And so I just want to take my last 3 minutes, if that's what it is, to say, for example, let's look at the report. Let's not look at the glorification of the report by the Prime Minister, but an objective view. I want to tell Dr. Andre and Mr. Jolly, thank you. Because I never thought that Dr. Andre would be so brave that he has a former IMF employee, managerial employee here, for him to speak so candidly about what the IMF have really told Dominica. So it says, for example, that real GDP growth has accelerated 4.5% from 3.5%. And so I, in my notes, when I was preparing this afternoon, and don't mind my dress, I just came from class. I would never try to dress like that. Typically, I would like to dress like Dr. Andre because I emulate him. But it's just because I just came from class. So, but my concern of that, I think Dr. Fontaine would agree, is that the full capacity? In economics, it's called efficiency. So yes, it grew 4.5%. Is on the demand curve. Is that the highest it could grow? Are we fully efficiently using our resources? That's just a concern. The other point I want to bring to your attention is that the IMF said, and for the listening public, that the country can operate a higher capacity. We are using the resources to full potential. I don't agree. Well, that's my concern. Yeah, I guess the point I want to make is it says strong execution of macro projects, and macro projects, of course, we know the airport, the cable, the geothermal. That is one aspect, lady and gentlemen. What about the micro aspect? So macro aspect, we talk about the national government and their big projects. What about the household? People buying their grocery. People have to go to Astafant and Nassif. What about the micro aspect? So these huge projects, who is benefiting? And a note on that, the increase in the real GDP, how has it spread out? Has it spread out equally? So one can say, how do you measure that? There's two ways. Statistically, political science, economics, there is something, well, just statistics. The Gini coefficient, people say Dr. George like to use big words. Oh, no. Gini is a short word. G-I-N-I. Gini coefficient. It's a score from 0 to 1. And what it measures what is called inequality of wealth. And if that number, the closer it is to 0, it means everybody benefiting. If it's higher to number 1, it means it's highly unequal, meaning some people making money and some people not making money. I did a research before I came there while I was at school. Dominica is 0.763. And the result said that is terrible. So, in the layman's term, some people making and a lot of people not making. The other way to measure it is what I'm hearing people saying on the radio. What about the agriculturists? What about the fishermen? What about the fact that I have so much people coming in? And so now that I know on my 4 minutes, when I can talk more in the ending, I want to mention something very important. I think it's really important for the listening public to hear. The debt to GDP ratio. How much are we making compared to how much are we borrowing? And I hear the Prime Minister saying, yes, the IMF said that it dropped from even 116 to 103 or something like that. Yes, but comparable to our Caribbean brothers and sisters in the OECS, it's terrible. The IMF herself said it. They said it's dropping, but the average for the Caribbean is 63. I did some research for the listening public. Grenada is 91. Trinidad is 64.5. St. Lucia is 74. Antigua is 67.5. Dominica, 103. It tells you how much we are borrowing. And finally, sir, in my last 30 seconds, the recommendation that the IMF give, it's a typical sort of recommendation, you know. IMF not there to save us, you know, it's there to give us certain policy structure that would guide us. So when we make decisions, it will help us stabilize our economy. Thank you for my 5 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. George, for this wonderful contribution here. Before I go back to you, Dr. Andre, and you know, there's this, Dion brought up this thing about debt to GDP ratio, and the reports talked about our debt repayment. We've brought it down a little bit, but it's still way out of proportion. I want to just go to Lambi, and first of all, I want to reach out and recognize all the people who are with us on YouTube and Facebook. Thanks a lot for sticking with us until now. Lambi, you want to give out the number so we can maybe take a couple of calls if people want to call in?
Yes, the Global View on Q, the numbers to contact us are as follow: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. Those are all local numbers. The international or the overseas number is as follow: 305-432-9624. Let me run those one more time. Local numbers: 449-3095-9697, 616-4257. The international number: 305-432-9624. And we're standing by for your call. Back to you, Mr. G.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lambi. Dr. Andre, I wanted to go to you with this. You know, we've listened to all what you had to say at first, what Dr. Fontaine had to say, what Andy Jolly and Dr. George and Maslin had to say. So, and we've done a cursory review of this IMF report, but what does all of this tell us about the management of Dominica's economy? What does this report tell us about it? What is it being, what is being proposed that we tighten our belts even more than what we have already done? You know, it's warning us about our spending, our national debt, or lack of exports, or dire state of our healthcare, high costs of living, and obvious deficits in local industries. I mean, we hardly have local industries. Most of what we had are gone. So what does this tell us about the current leadership and about the leadership over the past 25 years? Your thoughts?
Well, what it tells us is bad news. But here's a critique of this IMF report, as others in the past. It doesn't tell us a lot of important things we need to know. Oh, it tells you about, infrastructural development, airport, cable car, roads, agricultural, 36% growth in tourism. It doesn't tell you about the poverty index. It doesn't tell you about the living wages which are not being paid to workers. On the contrary, it suggests that they should reduce debt vulnerabilities by doing what? Chopping jobs. It doesn't tell you about the corruption index. It doesn't tell you about who is doing or who are receiving all these contracts to build airports, to build cable cars, to build roads. It doesn't tell you about the disempowerment and the disenfranchisement, quite frankly, of Dominican workers. It doesn't tell you about the exclusion of these workers from the productive activities of the state. It doesn't tell you about the systematic impoverishment of Dominicans underground as a government policy. It doesn't tell you that at all. It doesn't tell you about the unemployment rates. Probably it does. I just didn't see it. Does it tell you anything about the living standards? Person who still cannot, after so many years, repair their roofs. persons who can't, quite frankly, afford to send their children to school? Does it tell you about anything along those lines? Does it tell you anything about the health index? Does it tell you about the standard of care you can expect when you go to the Chinese Dominica hospital? Does it tell you about the cost of adult diapers? Does it tell you the cost of getting a blood test, not at this fancy hotel as they proclaim it, but at the private clinic? Does it tell you about the hundreds of Dominicans who have diabetes, but they cannot afford to buy the medication? It's deaf and dumb. It doesn't tell you about the discrimination index. It doesn't tell you those who get jobs are, quite frankly, those who parade themselves like peacocks dressed in red. It says nothing about these things. So it creates a false picture of growth. It is lipstick on a pig. Nothing more, nothing less. And all these human indicators indicate that we are not going anywhere. On the contrary, we are regressing. Therein lies the problem. What about production? It tells you about we have to reduce debt vulnerabilities. In other words, we have to reduce our debt indebtedness. But how are we going to do that? Hundreds of millions of dollars of the sales of passport are being hidden. I hope Iran didn't bomb the hotel where it's been, well, the bank or whatever it is. It's not being used to inure to the benefit of Dominicans, as in some of the other West Indian islands, such as St. Kitts, for example. It's been hidden, and we borrow as if borrowing is going out of fashion. So what is happening is that Dominica is being castrated economically by this administration. And after 20 years, what do we have to show? Indebtedness. Well, Dr. George and Dr. Thompson and Mr. Jolly will explain the ramifications of debt and so on. But if debt is crucifying your economy, then how are we talking about progress? We're not making progress because we are caught in a perpetual debt trap. And Dr. George will tell you about a book written by this Guyanese economist was it Clive? In the 60s, persistent poverty for the many, but persistent wealth for the few. And that is the situation in which Dominica is mired in. Unequitable wealth, or lack of wealth among those who need it the most. You will not get a scholarship unless you go probably after hours to sing Hallelujah. That is how we have been reduced. Our dignity, our integrity has been eroded and robbed. Because now, in this economy, the sweat of your brow is not enough to uplift you, to lift you up as it used to do. Now is how fast you can lower your pants. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. Lambi, you want to take a call?
Call, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still there.
Sorry to keep you waiting. Please go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen. Very interesting program. When you analyze the cost of GDP, what makes up our GDP, Sheridan and Dr. Andre and the other guests, do you remember that we had a project, Kapinski, that cost $195 million in passports money? Now, if the hotel took 3 years to build, that's over $500 million, right? And then when Zampoli took them to court, we found out that the hotel construction was $65 million. And the other under $140 million may have gone to services. As the gentleman said earlier, one of your guests said, somebody's making millions, but not the general public. So you have to wonder, what is the cost of our airport? Because if it is at the rate as we're building these hotels in Dominica, clearly we may have negative growth, but the fact, these services, the cost of these services, our promoters and passport sellers and our developers, these figures are so high, it's showing growth, but not in raising the human development index of our people, not giving them the income that their disposable income, would tell you that you have a country growing. So we have a major problem. How do we measure GDP? Is it by the cost? Because I remember people were clapping when they told them a single bedroom apartment costs over $200,000 and a two-bedroom apartment costs over $380 in these housing projects. And I know we have contractors here who can do it for less than $100,000 for the three-bedroom in an apartment building. So what these projects are costing us is our development. Passport sales, the volume is a bonanza, which has to be invested for future generations. It's been squandered. If you have to look at corruption as a part of GDP, it may be more than the real growth. You may have a shrunken economy, yet all this money, it is added to our GDP, makes us look like we're growing fast. Granted, an airport would contribute to our construction services, but at what cost are we building this airport? At what cost are we building these apartments, all these housing complex around Dominica, health centers? So is that real growth? Is it corruption? Is it services to developers and passport salespeople that is making up that growth? So we need the economists like Thompson Fountain and the other. I'm an engineer, but I did enough development economics to understand that when these major services, because I was just reading an article recently where they're building 100 and something bedroom hotel somewhere in St. Thomas or St. Croix. And when you look at the cost of this as compared to Kapinski or the new hotel recently built, Oasis, it's chalk and cheese. They're less than $25 million, but I think the figure they had for Oasis was $75 million from the alleged cabinet paper. So we have to wonder, what contribution is that making to our GDP? Is it the real cost of the hotel or the developers and the promoters cost of the services, the passport, the CBI services? So that is a major concern that I have. And I want to ask the IMF, how do they factor that in? Or even Thompson can find out how they factor it in, because he's an economist. But these are my concerns. And I would like to hear the callers, the panelists' view on that.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for that contribution. Dr. Fontaine, if Lambi doesn't have another call, I would come to you, Dr. Fontaine. Lambi, you want to take another call? Let's take it.
Caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, greetings to the panel, Mr. G, everybody.
Good night.
Mr. G, I heard Dr. George said something, and I have to ask myself a question. And as the caller before me was talking about the GDP, that's the same concern I have, because if our rate is 103%, meaning for every dollar we make or the government makes, we still have to look for 3 cents to put with that to pay the debt. So I try to understand how can we get growth in a situation like that, because to me it's impossible. Maybe I am not smart like Dr. George and the rest of the panel to understand that, but that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I don't know how they calculate as the caller say, maybe Dr. Fontaine can tell us, or maybe I am wrong. If I am wrong, I'm subject to correction. But if every dollar we make, we still have to look for 3 cents more to put with it to pay our debt. It's impossible, Mr. G, for me, for us to make for us to get growth. So I would like Thompson to tell us, in a situation like that, how can we tackle it? Because you already spending more than you're making. You owe more than you're making. I don't know if it doesn't make sense. Somebody need to explain this to me, Mr. G. Thank you.
Right. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, so let's go to Dr. Fontaine. You know, Dr. Fontaine, you had the 2 callers and you raised some good points there. The first caller raised a question about, you know, the services and the fees in these construction projects. I mean, and then of course, I mean, Dion raised the question of the debt to GDP ratio. We are not, obviously, we're not very efficient at paying down on our debts. I mean, we're still way above everybody else in the region. But I mean, one of the things Dr. Andre mentioned is what the report is not saying, is not really dealing with the poverty index. It's not really dealing with the difficulties people having to live in Dominica, the ordinary person's life, how this economy is affecting the ordinary person's life. Whereas Prime Minister is saying, oh, hey, you know, we exported $215 million last year. And then what happens to the local people? Absolutely everybody going, so to speak. And so, I'm sure you'll want to tell us about this question of the living wages and the job losses and all of that. And the fact that we're really not exporting anything. We're not exporting agriculture. We're not doing any manufacturing. We're not doing any agribusiness to talk to us about what is the report is not really telling us in any depth, Dr. Fontaine.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I'm going to address that. I'm also going to talk a little bit the question that was raised specifically, the caller raised about the tax, about the debt. So let me explain that quickly, and I'll talk about what Dr. Andre raised together with the previous caller, because I think they're related, the poverty part of it and these big numbers in our GDP. The total debt as it is exceeds the gross domestic product. So our GDP is roughly $2.1 billion. Our debt is about $2.2 billion. Okay, so it's more than it. But in terms of repayment, you repay, that is the stock of debt, but you repay a portion of that debt every year. That amounts to about $100 million. So we pay about $100 million. Which works out to be about 30 cents on every dollar that the country makes in taxes. We pay about 50 cents from that. So I hope that clarifies that. Okay, so you have an ability to repay that debt because it is a fraction of the amount you're making in revenues. Okay, it's like having a mortgage. You might take a mortgage for $500,000, but every year you pay a few $1,000s down on that mortgage. It's the same thing with the government. Now, with respect to the question about the GDP and all of what the caller said is absolutely correct, and that's the reason why I said that the GDP is not broad-based. You can have a situation as we have in Dominica. So if this government was behaving differently, if this government truly cared about the people of Dominica, where you have a project as you have an international airport, you would have a thriving community in Wesley. But Wesley is not thriving. If you go to Wesley, in fact, the people there are struggling, notwithstanding that a multi-billion-dollar project is happening right on the doorstep. And it's just because of this disregard that this government has for the people of this country, that they're using CBI resources and the people are not benefiting materially from it. So yes, we can have a state, and that ties in again to what Dr. Dion was talking about, the Gini coefficient. Our Gini coefficient is huge in the sense that we have a very small percent of the population having probably 80-90% of the wealth. The majority of Dominicans are living if not close to the poverty line, but they're hovering around the poverty line. When you consider that the majority of workers in this country get an average of $1,000 a month, that tells that is not a living wage, then it means that the people are struggling. So when you look at the distribution of the wealth, it is very uneven, it is very unequal, pointing toward Gini coefficient. When you look at the spread of this wealth, the majority of the population, as was rightly observed by Dr. Andre, the majority of the population are effectively struggling to make ends meet. When you look at the fact that we have a GDP that is driven by investments, but investments into a project where the vast majority of the amount of the money is being pulled out of the country, is being extracted out of the country. So you have a situation where you're having all of those developments, but in truth and in fact, the country is not moving forward, because the path that we have chosen, that this government has deliberately chosen, is a path that ignores the people of the country, is a path that favors foreigners over locals, is a path that allows foreign workers to come into Dominica and get the biggest stake of the pie. So our truck drivers, our heavy equipment operators sit on the sidelines and see that work going to foreigners. And the bulk of whatever these foreigners receive, they send back to their families in other countries. So Dominica has been extremely good to the economy of Thailand and to the Chinese economy, not so good to the Dominicans living here in Dominica. This is the reality that we face in this country. And that is what the report will not tell you. So you'll see, GDP of 4.2%, but the majority of that is not going through the economy. It is not being enjoyed by the people. And in the midst of a seeming spurt of boom in wealth in this country, the population, far and large, are getting poorer and poorer.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for that, Dr. Fontaine. I mean, there's so many more questions that I have to put to you, but I want to go to Andy. Andy, I mean, you listen to Dr. Fontaine, you look at this thing from a practical business standpoint, and what are you seeing happening there? I mean, notwithstanding what this report does not say. I mean, we all know all the things it does not say. I mean, it's not really reaching down to the pocket of the ordinary person in Dominica. It's not thinking about them at all. But what do you see is happening in Dominica in the economy?
Well, here's the thing. It's I think two things. I'm going to take your show in a different direction for a little bit, Mr. G. And I'm going to go back to the basics, because a lot of time people forget basics. And we go all over the place. And I know we have a few doctors on the program, but here's what I want to go back to. I want to go back to what the IMF is, first of all, because a lot of the lay people in Dominica don't know what the IMF is. And the IMF, which is also called the International Monetary Fund, serves a lot of small Caribbean countries. And the primary role of this group is surveillance, financial assistance, and capacity development. I want everybody to understand that. And this is why we're having this discussion. So in terms of surveillance, you're looking at things like economic health checks. The IMF is supposed to monitor countries for economic and financial policies to ensure that these policies are stable. The stability of these policies matter. The second thing that we also have to watch out is the financial assistance. The IMF provides loans and emergency funding to help countries manage balance of payments problems and recover from crises. So there it is that you have that portion of it. The last part of it is capacity development, which is basically technical assistance. Throughout the Caribbean region, the IMS, which is for most people don't understand, the IMS is based in Barbados, helps local officials build skills necessary to manage their economies. So here it is that we have a group that is built to help countries. The IMF right now has about 191 countries in it. And if anybody wants to do this, you can go on and look at what the IMF really says about Dominica. So if you have to look at what this report says, it says something plain and simple. As of April 26, which is this month here, the report just came out. It says basically the IMF classifies Dominica as having a high risk of debt distress. It says right there in front of everybody, in front of this report, that while public debt has declined from the post-pandemic peak, because it was a lot higher. So listen to this, public debt declined, it remains elevated due, and that's Dominica's debt, remains elevated due to high construction-related imports and investment in climate-resistant infrastructure. So if you have to look at it, our total debt right now, as in Dominica, we're looking at a 98.3% of GDP. So when that caller says, hey, how come we can't pay for that? 98% of our gross domestic product for 2026 is estimated 98%. That is all debt. So if you have to look at it, we're going to make under 2% that actually belong to us to put in our pocket. Our external debt is projected at 65.4% of our GDP for the central government. And then our domestic debt is projected at 32.9% of our GDP. Again, all these things are just numbers out there, but you have to realize that Dominica's debt remains well above the Eastern Caribbean currency union, where the target is about 60% of GDP. So we are so far above the rest of them. And again, maybe because we've taken the wrong road. If you have to look at it, our risk rating is rated as high, not moderate, not fair to partly cloudy. We're high. So explaining that for all the people to understand on Radio Land out there is very, very important. So right now, it says here, the IMF credit outstanding, as of April 13th, 2026, Dominica owes the IMF approximately $12.3 million US. Primary creditors, 92% of public debt is owed bilaterally and multilateral creditors, with the World Bank as the biggest shareholder of 40% of our debt. So when you have to break all that down, being in business, here it is that we're here. How do we expect to go into a bank as a business person and say, look, I would like you to borrow me money because I think I'm going to be able to pay it back with these statistics? And for every panelist on there, I want you to understand this. And Mr. Thompson Fontaine is on there. I hope he won't call me a liar. But the truth is that if Dominica was a business, nobody would buy Dominica as a business, because we would be considered as a failing business. And I've said this over and over again. We took a prime minister, a young man that didn't ever even balance his checkbook, and we put him in office and we tell him, run a country and manage our millions of dollars. And the same young man that has probably never, Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit, probably has never balanced his own checkbook once in his life. Here it is that he is now telling us, let us ignore the IMF and let us ignore the best practices in the world and what all the other islands in the Caribbean or what all the other islands in the IMF group are doing, and let us go ahead and do our own thing. Now, for those of you all who don't know very much out there, I'll tell you all, So the only Caribbean country that has rejected the IMF and they understand and decided to exempt themselves from the IMF, for those of you all who don't know, there is Cuba. So in this setting, I'm going to tell you, we are not very far from Cuba. We're not very far. You can go research this. So if you ask me what's the business outlook out there, I'm going to tell you we're going to look like Cuba in a couple of years. If you tell me if what Mr. Scarrett is doing out there is going to work, I'm going to tell you we're going to look like Cuba in a couple of years. And a lot of people may say, well, this is not a very good prognosis, but we need to make a turnaround. We need to change right now. So after all this definition that I've given people, after all this public knowledge that I've given you, you need to go home and think to yourself. Here it is that we have a respectable group telling us, guys, go ahead and see how we can make some necessary changes. And our own prime minister comes in front of us and said, don't worry about it. We have it under control. We're going to take care of this. I just gave you the statistics. I just gave you all the facts that you need. Right now, we owe the IMF a significant amount of money. We owe a lot of creditors a lot of money. We have been borrowing like crazy. And Mr. G, one of the things that I ask people to ask themselves, yes, we're borrowing a lot of money out there, but what are we signing as collateral for all those funds? Because in my knowledge and as businessman, I know when I go to the bank, they say, Mr. Jolly, what do you have as collateral? So are we using Dominica as collateral? Are we using Dominica's passports as collateral? What are we using to borrow all this money? So this is a good question for everybody to ask themselves. I don't have a very good business outlook. We have a prime minister, as I said, that has very little financial knowledge. And not only that, the people that have financial knowledge do not surround him today. In fact, our Minister of Finance is a doctor, and doctors have been known to be one of the worst financial people in society. Doctors take good care of their patients, but they have very little financial knowledge. So I'm going to tell everybody, please do some thinking and do some understanding out there.
Thanks a lot. And Maslin, bear with me a second. I want to go to Dr. Fontaine to ask him to expand on what Andy has just told us there a moment ago. You need to unmute your mic, Dr.
Yes,
Fontaine.
Absolutely. Andy is bang on. I could not have said it better. The prognosis for this country is not very good. Based on all of the metrics, I mean, a doctor can look into a patient's eyes and say, well, your blood pressure is X amount and so on, and your sugar level is that, and very likely that you will live for more than, they can make that kind of pronouncement. And is the very same way we can look at the metrics on this economy, and we can say that we are not in a good place at all, and we continue to move down the line of countries. We continue to be surpassed by every country, and getting to the point where we could even get to a Cuba situation is very possible. Because bear in mind, this government has not found a way to utilize our resources. The key resource that this country has, which could make the majority of this population comfortable, which is agriculture and the lands that we have and the water that we have, they've not been able to use that at all. They have not been able to transform that into making money. And the idea of looking at Dominica as a product, a nature product that can be sold to the world, they've not been able to get that going. So even when we've made billions of dollars out of the sale of the CBI program, they found a way to put that money in the hands of a private company outside of Dominica. So what you have is a country that is literally broke, a country that is quickly running out of its main resource, which is the CBI program, a country that continues to borrow like there is no tomorrow. I mean, we talked about they violating the fiscal rule of 2% of GDP as the current the fiscal deficit, 2%. They violated that. They continue to borrow at a pace which, if you continue on that trajectory, you're going to be in even more problems. And also the fact that they've not been able to generate any kind of economic activity, any kind of growth. It means that we are facing a very, very bleak future in Dominica, unless, of course, there is a change of government and there is in place a party that understand those things and can take care of business. Otherwise, to continue along this path of 25 years that we've had is just more misery, more failure, and more pain for the people of Dominica.
You know, and Marceline, let me come to you now. I mean, you know, you heard Thompson, you heard all the other folks and Andy and so on before you. I mean, what if we had invested some of those billions of dollars that we accumulated from the past, but instead of putting them in the hands of some foreigner, some account somewhere, what if we had used that money and invested it in agriculture and invested it in manufacturing, in agribusiness, and tech and knowledge industries, and so on? How wouldn't that have been much better to help the pockets of the ordinary person, to help them to pay a little light bill and their, you know, and so on, take a little vacation, take care of their health and whatnot? I mean, wouldn't that have been much better instead of having everybody else, the vast majority of people just go in Latin Dominica?
Mr. G, the answer is quite simple. Had that been done, we would not have been here today. And that IMF report would not have been. Even if there was an IMF report, it would not have been a grim report on the Dominican economy. And we are borrowing all of that money from the IMF, but from who else are we borrowing those monies from? Who are our lenders? And I'm wondering if we are borrowing money from the Chinese as well. And all of that, you know, all of the monies that Dominica realized from the CBI that, you know, was placed in someone else's account, because I can't understand how you have a business, you are selling the products, your products, and you're saving someone else's account. To me, it's only, you know, I've heard about drug dealers not keeping their monies or, you know, their assets in their names. But I've never heard a legal constitutional government behaving like that. I've never heard that. And at what point did we approve for Dominica's resources to be held in some account abroad? Whose decision was that? Was that a cabinet decision? And, you know, I know this, you know, this case on, you know, this recent case that, you know, Dr. Fountain and, you know, the opposition filed recently. I know it is still, we were still pending the hearing, still pending the verdict of that case. But you see why it is important, why it was so important to bring that case to court so that the Prime Minister can speak to that as to where our monies are. And who is MMC, by the way? Who are these people? Because there seem to be a bunch of non-transparent people. And I don't know. I don't know, but, you know, I am concerned about how those debts are going to be paid. And what collateral did they really use to secure those debts? I am seeing, you know, some Chinese taking over certain parts of Dominica. And I'm wondering, is that part of the memorandum of understanding that we have not seen? Is that part of the payment of the debts that we cannot service. Because if we have never seen the memorandum of understanding, the MOU, that our prime minister signed on Dominica's behalf with China, we don't know what the real figures are, the real numbers are, the real statistics are, because this is a government that is accustomed of hiding things. The information the IMF receives, where does it come from? Who tenders that type of information? And are they really giving the honest, the honest numbers to these people?
Mr. T, just very quickly, as Maslin made that point, I noticed in the IMF report, they're still talking about Petrocarib debt. I thought we were told that the Petrocarib forgave the debt to the government, right? PDSV. Wasn't that some big news? I said, unless I got it wrong.
No, that is correct. That was confirmed.
Yeah, but it is still recorded in the books of the government as debt. So I'm not sure what's going on there. And that points to the question that Marston was asking. You know, the integrity of the data that is being fed, because it is showing that Dominica has a debt, the Petrocarib debt on its books.
Man, from this type of Alibaba type of attitude, the type of governance, I think, I think we all are screwed. Dominicans are being taken for a ride. And I don't know at what point in time we all are going to realize that we have an obligation, we have a patriotic responsibility to Dominica to hold our leaders accountable, because this is going on for too long. I mean, 25 years, you have designed a war against the economy. You have unleashed a war on Dominicans, on every sector of Dominicans, the private sector, all institutions. You have corrupted everything. Even institutions that are supposed to be functioning outside of government, you have found a way to corrupt those institutions. We have, monies sitting in the banks that Dominicans cannot access through a little loan. And it comes back to the same thing. Had that government, after Hurricane Maria, invest in some of those businesses, the indigenous businesses that went under. Take, for example, First Domestic. By now, half of that loan would have been paid off. First Domestic would still be there contributing to the economy, still employing Dominicans. All the hotels that were not paid, they would have been paid. They would have been up and running, up and functioning. Persons would have been employed. Those persons would be contributing to the economy, to social security. Everybody would be doing well. The farmers would be making money, because those hotels buy from the farmers. They buy fish to feed the guests. They buy the vegetables. The gas companies would be making money. The electricity company would be taking off a big chunk, because we all know how expensive electricity is in Dominica. The water company, the Wasco, would be making money. And everywhere, every section would be making money. The hospital would not be in that condition. The other day when I was in Dominica, when there was a blackout, can you believe the hospital blacked out too? Imagine you're in a hospital, hooked up on all sorts of things just for you to live, and electricity is gone, and the hospital is plunged into darkness. And is that a country that is geared towards an upward movement, towards development? Is that a country in the 21st century? I think we have gone back to Bullseye days. I think we have gone back to the pre-colonial era. And this cannot continue. We have to say no. After Hurricane Maria, when all the grants were given to Dominica, those grants were not given to they were not placed in the appropriate places. The farmers did not get monies from those grants. The fishermen did not get money. They could not rehabilitate their farms. We know agriculture is something that drives the economy, something that plows into the economy, because this was the backbone of our economy. It was agriculture. It never was sports. It never was. What are we exporting? We're exporting corruption. We are so corrupt that we have enough corruption to export. When we take our passports, our sovereign assets, and we gift it to criminals, for what? What are we doing that for? Look, the other day, this Palio Zampoli in New York. I remembered when Vince Henderson said that he was rubbing shoulders. This little black boy from St. Joseph was rubbing shoulders with billionaires. That same Zampoli man. Right now, Vince Henderson is very quiet. Vince, you need to come and apologize to the Dominican people, because you know what Zampoli has been into. And you're hearing the news. Do not go silent. Do not go quiet, because this is your diplomat. This is Roosevelt Skerritt's diplomat. And now you suddenly goes quiet. A man that is alleged was involved with Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein, in the trafficking of underage girls, a pedophile ring. And this is the man that you were gloating about rubbing shoulders with in New York. I wonder how you found this man. And is it true to the adage that birds of a feather really flock together? It is sad, but these people are quiet. They are suddenly quiet, and they think we are not watching. They think that we have forgotten, but we have not forgotten. And these people have just ruined Dominica. They have just ruined our country. And this is the reason a mayday call to more women to stand up, to speak up, to come on board, come and make a difference. Put yourselves at the forefront to run for political office, because the men that we gave that mandate to, the men in Dominica we gave the mandate, who were supposed to be temporary custodians of our country's resources and for leading our country, they have failed us. It's time for a women movement. It's time for women to rise up and come forward.
Thanks a lot, Marceline.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for, I wanted to go over to Dr. Dion George to ask him to expand on some of this. I mean, if you look at it for the past few years, for example, our public servants have not really been getting any benefits. I mean, there's a 1%, a 0%, a this percent. I mean, at the rate that we're going now, do you anticipate that we, in fact, with our debt repayment situation and the fact that we just borrowed and cannot repay, do you anticipate that we may arrive at a situation where sometime in the not too distant future, the government may not be able to pay its public servants?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gregoire and Marceline. Very good points. I think all the panelists has made some very poignant contribution. Considering the benefits, and again, tying it with the IMF, there is something called structural adjustment programs. And what that means, it's a stabilization program for the listening public. And the view here is that on the expenditure side and on the revenue side, they have to make some adjustments. Typically, like when Dr. Andre earlier made reference to pulling down your pants, I thought that was really interesting, but he's serious and he's right. When they talk about make certain adjustments, they're telling you to cut your wage bill. And so the question you ask about public servants and increase, that would not necessarily be a recommendation from the IMF. When they tell you cut your expenditure, when they tell you benefit policy modification, very nice words. That means if you have students studying at Midwestern State University, to perhaps lower it down. On the revenue side, when they say on the expenditure side as well, if they were to say, for example, retirement age, if it was 60, you can, Andy Jolly is a businessman, you can delay that payment, put it to 65. So you delay that payment you have for young retirees. That's on the expenditure side. On the revenue side, when they tell you expand your revenue, I mean, Thompson will tell you, it means expand your tax broad. So Miss Marceline Edwards used to braid hair, and she used to braid hair very well. All of a sudden, the government says, well, from now on, you have to pay a tax on every head you braid. And so essentially, these stabilization programs, it would help the country stabilize. And I'm not criticizing the IMF, but I am putting things where a country needs some sort of stabilization program to get on track, that they need to do it. Another thing I would say, I heard Mr. Jolly spoke toward the main purpose of the IMF, which I thought of doing that, so I won't repeat it. And that's good. Thank you for doing that. I am of a school of thought that one may call a historically Black college, and we have what some may consider a radical view of the world and how it works. And so in 1945, there was World War II, and Europe was destroyed, and that's for the listening public to get a view of who the IMF really is. And so there's something called the Bretton Woods system. It's Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, where they developed those three institutions. They developed GATT, G-A-T-T, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade. They developed and Thompson, if I make a mistake, help me, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and they developed I'll get back to that one.
The IMF.
The IMF. The IMF. And so the IMF, and Thompson, you're good. So the IMF has never changed. But GATT has changed to the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And
World
then,
Health.
And then the other one changed to the World Bank. So these are three institutions: the IMF, today, the World Bank, and the World Trade Organization. I say all of that to make a general statement that will shock every single. I'm so happy that Andy in the beginning says that we'll have diverse views. Consider that the Caribbean, Africa, Latin America, South Pacific never existed when the IMF was created. What that means, therefore, is their goals, their objectives, the reason of their existence wasn't about Dominica or the Southern Group. Now, one might say this is a radical view. One can clearly see you were raised in some historically Black college. But the authors that I have studied, like Walter Rodney and many other scholars, will share with you that it doesn't mean that if a hurricane hits us, we cannot benefit from them. And the counter argument to that is, when they do help us, are we genuine to our cause? Do we take the money and diversify the economy, build the necessary infrastructure, do this, or do we take it and campaign? Or do we blame the IMF for when they were created, we did not exist? We did not exist, meaning we were colonies to them. We were not independent. There's a name, Dominica, but we had no say. And so the view that my school of thought have is that IMF is a bank, like I go and get a credit card, but it's not just a bank, and they give 3 areas of concentration. And of course, the World Bank give short-term loans for projects. And of course, the World Trade Organization, the whole view that we can trade freely without putting tariffs, like my uncle in Washington, D.C., tariffs. And so the World Trade Organization says, let's not do that, like right now, Canada say, from now on, they're going to put all their money in their military and in their business. I heard England said the same thing. But back to the IMF, the SAP programs for the listening public, it's structural adjustment programs, is really not there to give you money, It's here to stabilize your economy. So to Sheridan's direct question about public workers and increase, that is something the IMF may not recommend, because they would want you to cut your expenditure. I would feel sorry for the student at Midwestern. The IMF might say maybe you need to cut it down a little bit. I would feel sorry for a beautiful young lady, 62, wanting to retire. The IMF might say increase it. But I will pause and end on this note a little bit. I think concerning the decision about Desbranches and those contracts which I alluded to earlier about giving MCC all of these things, now we're in a problem, allegedly. How do government go making policy? There is a book I teach, it's called Public Policy Formulation. Man, everybody on this panel know it. There is identify the problem, set the agenda, do the formulation of the policy, get feedback, do an evaluation, have scholars and academias look at it after. There's a process. You cannot simply one-handedly go and just give somebody a project and now you heal in Suku, or right now we're in a problem. I mean, the process is right here. Tell everybody on their phone, Google public policy formulation, and you'll see 5 steps. And lastly, and that's for any opposition party, again, there's diversity of views. Not because the Prime Minister, Elas, I want to be like Mr. Nassif. There are times you can say somebody did something well, and there are times you can say they did something wrong. How do I say this? There is capitalism and there is democratic socialism. One might say capitalism is so vibrant, you can be as rich as you can be, that it's not a common central economy, and that it's good to have the invisible hands of demand and supply, and you'll prosper. What happens when something happens and you don't have what is called social safety networks? Where you pass down in Atlanta and you say Roseau smelling, and not bad talking Atlanta, but there are places in Atlanta that has a stench, that you will see homeless people. And so one considers, is it the government's responsibility to have some sort of social safety network for the less fortunate? I don't think that goes against the IMF. I think someone has to have some semblance of a sort of people that are less fortunate. So I'm not saying Red Clinic. No, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not going to give people money. I'm sure that can go in garden up in Salisbury Heights. What am I saying? What about the single parent? That child did not have breakfast. That child didn't go in lunch. So if I was government, like Dr. Fontaine, I would have a little food program for children, not a red clinic for grown people that laughing. It's a different thinking about the social. I'm not against social network for the less fortunate, I just not for the free giving. So I just wanted to add that little last point to say that we have to look at it on both sides. And so nobody's going to look at the IMF program where they're telling you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And just because they told you that you had some growth, you're forgetting that you forget the Gini coefficient where that is not equal. It's a few people that making the most. And so what are you boasting of? Where in the Caribbean, especially in the OECS, it's ridiculous how high our debt to GDP ratio is. So I think a program like that, if all political parties could listen, could hear the objective truth. It's not a criticism. It's the objective truth of what the report really says. And finally, for Bob Marley, how do you calculate debt to GDP ratio? You take the total debt divided by the GDP, you multiply it by 100 to give you a percentage. And just to recap, in the whole OECS, Dominica is the highest. And the average in the Caribbean is 63. And we are 103. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. George. Now we are winding down to the time, the event. And so I'm going to have to ask Maslin, your final remarks.
Thank you. Well, Mr. G.
And incidentally, I will probably, when I come to Dr. Fontaine, I'll probably ask him to answer the question that Dion posed about the safety nets.
Yes. Well,
If we were to get into government, of course.
Yes. Well, Mr. G, thank you very much for inviting me to this program this evening. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been, great being here with you all. And especially Dr. Fontaine. Dr. Fontaine is one that he knows the IMF language. One of the things I said that, Dominicans don't understand the diplomatic jargons of the IMF. Dominicans don't know about spreadsheet analysis and all of that. The only sheet majority of Dominicans know about is the sheet they spread on their bed to sleep. And but what the Dominicans know for a fact is the bread and butter issues. They don't need a spreadsheet for a knife to spread butter on their bread for them to know that they don't have butter to spread on that bread, or they don't have bread. And it's a situation where people think that we can always say we are not promoting negativity against the government, and they rather see the cup half full opposed to seeing it empty. But when you have an empty cup, you know the cup is empty. When your children are hungry, you know they are hungry. So no IMF reports need to tell you that Dominica is doing bad for you to see Dominica is doing bad, because you can practically see the country falling apart. One of the things that we come back and we look at is the Debwash issue. We will stand for the Debwash issue. Debwash with the river has been a source of food. It has been an essential commodity in the community. So we will stand for that. This has sustained families for many years, and not only with food, but with drinking water. So even when it gets rough and the Wasco, there's no water, in the pipes. Sometimes a storm, there's no water in the taps, but that river is there. That river is going to continue serving its purpose. We will continue standing for Debwash. We will continue making our voices be heard. And it has Something has to give where this government has to listen to Dominicans, knowing full well that they do not own this country. They're just temporary custodians of this country. And we have a bona fide, we have bona fide interests, bona fide rights. We are bona fide Dominicans. We are bona fide citizens. So we have to do more to stand up for Dominica. We have to do more to embrace the gift, that gift of fun and fauna that was gifted to us. And we can say it's on a platter because we did not pay for it with our blood. We did not pay for it with our tears. Our ancestors did. So we have to do more to preserve it if we want to call this beautiful, blessed land, Dominica, our home. Let us join together. Let us speak the language that we need to speak, that civic mindedness, that love, that Kudme spirit. Let us uphold each other. Let us teach each other. And no amount of discussion is too much, because that is how you get people to listen. Something will fall when you sow your seeds out there, whether it's one or two that will grow. And what we are doing here tonight, we are sowing those seeds, so it will fall on the right ears that it needs to fall on. But let us do what we have to do as a country, as a people, because at the end of the day, we are Dominicans. And we will maintain that right. We will maintain our place as first-class citizens, even if we are being squeezed out and treated like third-class citizens. But it is us to assume our right, assume our place. And under the Constitution, we, the people, shall prevail. The Constitution was written for we, the people, and we will take our positions and stand our ground. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marceline. Dr. George, your closing remarks?
Oh, yes, Mr. Gregoire, thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Andre, for all your support. Dr. Thompson, all what I am talking about there is because you came and spent time with me and watched me and guided me. For that, I am thankful. Miss Marceline, I don't know if you have in the book this year. If you haven't it, let me know. I can bring my little book on IMF. This time I will purchase everything. I'll have my own net. And Dr. Jolly, I like your points. You come from a business point of view. Lambi, it's been a while. Nice to see you. Very good. But Thompson, before I go, I want to clear something. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development that was created during the Bretton Woods system, it turned to the World Bank. So that's the World Bank.
Correct.
Yes, the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, turned to the WTO. World Trade.
Yes.
And then the
IMF.
IMF.
The IMF.
It has never changed.
No, that's correct.
Right.
So the Bretton Woods institutions, correct.
Correct. And so I think it was really good. I think it was educative. I think no one hates the Dominican government, but I think one of the, Sheridan, I would say, responsibility that we as citizens have is to hold the government accountable. I mean, I'm serious. I don't want to recite poem, but there is a gentleman named Thomas Paine, and he has a book called Dr. Andrew Will Tell You, Common Sense. There's another gentleman named Thomas Jefferson, and he will tell you we hold this truth to be self-evident that all men were created equal, endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if a government were to abridge these rights, it is the responsibility of the people to overthrow that government and elect a new one. Do not give me police. I recited Thomas Jefferson. Good night.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Dr. George. Andy, yeah, you have the floor for your closing remarks.
Well, in my closing remarks, I don't think any one of us hate the government, but I will tell you we have. I'm a businessman, and today I run several companies. I think I run close to 17 or 18 companies today that are registered. And by the way, every one of my companies is profitable. But I will tell you, we have a prime minister in Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit that is very uneducated. And when I talk about the uneducatedness of it, I talk about financially uneducated. He's not smart. So I'm going to just say it for all the panelists on there. We have a prime minister that's not smart. We have a prime minister also that's easily influenced by glitter. His lack of financial knowledge is crazy. I'm in business every day, and the direction that he takes, I cannot understand. I ask my accountant to look at what the gentleman is saying, and the accountants, they're stunned at what our prime minister is doing to Dominica. It's almost like we should go left, and he's totally saying, nope, we're going right. And that is it. And the last part about our Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit, I'm going to just say for everybody here, he's arrogant. And by the arrogance, I mean the fact that I'm in business. I hire the best accountants. I hire the best lawyers. I hire the best people to work for me. And I'm going to tell you, this man has done none of this. In fact, some of the people that work and represent his community, I am totally dissatisfied with, because the lack of knowledge and the lack of business knowledge is just perplexing. But I'm going to take a little time real quick here on the show, and in my closing comments, I'm going to go over some of the main points, because a lot of times people say, well, you're just speaking your mind. Well, I don't want to speak my mind here. I want to give people facts that they can go home and take with them. And the International Monetary Fund has been around for a long time. And I told you earlier that we have 191 members in this fund. Currently, Dominica is ranked as a mid-tier debt carrier, and we're nominally ranked at the number 187th in the world of the number of countries. Keep in mind, we have 191 and we're ranked at 187. And this is just reflecting that we're one of the smallest economies on the IMF's radar. We're not a very big economy at all. And with our outstanding debt, it is just totally incredible. Now, if you have to look at what the IMF says about Dominica in this thing, it tells you Dominica ranks poorly regarding debt sustainability compared to all the other targets in the region. Our debt to GDP ratio, I'm going to repeat that for somebody again, is 103% in 2026. And that's well above what they're looking for, which is about a benchmark at 60. And you heard a little earlier that most Caribbean islands rank about 63. And here we are at 103. Now, for most people, would celebrate 103 if you were going to school and you got a test. And the only way you got 103 on a test is if you got a little extra credit in class. And Mr. Skerrit didn't get extra credit. He went the opposite way. We are going in a totally wrong direction. 103% of your debt represents the fact that you cannot take care of yourself, even though you were to take care of yourself, because you're past it. Keep this in mind. The debt, it tells you, it recommends a very high level of distress. Now, again, a lot of people don't know this about Dominica. We're one of the top 10, we're always in the top 10% of countries globally in GDP losses with related to climate issues. So again, when you ask these questions, you ask yourself, well, where are we at in Dominica? Well, we're in a vulnerable position. Our prime minister has put us in a very vulnerable position because of the investments. Again, we don't have a prime minister set. But I'm going to go to the last point of the IMF. And a lot of people, our prime minister was on stage the other day and stressed so very highly of the fact that Dominica, it had represented a 4.5 accelerated growth. Well, why did we get 4.5 accelerated growth? For most smart people, they look at that and they say, well, what happened? Well, it's because we're the only Caribbean country, or one of them, that don't have an international airport. We have no marina. We do not have good hotel system. We don't have good this and we don't have good that. So we are trying to build something. But in order to build it, we're not using our own money and our own resources. What we're doing is borrowing other people's capital. So technically, when we borrow something from somebody, we have to pay them back. If not, we will be owned by that person. So this growth that we are so happy about, the 4.5% growth, is not really growth. That is money that we borrowed to do a couple projects. So hopefully, if those projects succeed perfectly, and if everything works out, then we are going to go ahead and pay back the growth. But the most important line, which everybody forgot in this whole thing, and I'll wrap up with this, is that if you read the IMF report, there's a slight place on there that says areas of concern. And if you read the areas of concern, one of the biggest areas of concern was fiscal discipline. It basically says our Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit, and I'll jump in there, Mr. McIntyre as well, has no fiscal discipline, and they fall short. They fall short of Dominica's own rules. Keep in mind here, we made rules and our own prime minister not following the rules. Where in God's name have we heard this before? Our own prime minister not following rules that he made. That happens every day of the week. I'm going to just put it on paper and say, governance and transparency. The IMF said the fund stressed the need for leadership to establish the long-delayed Financial Responsibility Committee. Skerrit was supposed to do this a long time ago, and he's never done the Financial Responsibility Committee. They also told us, look, we need to improve our CBI program. We need to have governance by enhancing due diligence and transparency. Nobody brought that up. You notice he never talked about this. He never talked about increasing transparency. Now, we also need, the last part about it that they said, we need to make sure we modernize public financial management to address persistent weaknesses in fiscal reporting and data collection. Now, we don't have good data collection and we don't have good fiscal reporting. So all those numbers that you are so rejoicing that we increased by 4.5%, those may not be true anyway, because guess what? The IMF noticed that something might be wrong in the numbers. And if you notice, or somebody, we have a common term that the math not mathing. So therefore, the IMF looks at this, and one of the big things that the IMF approached that none of us talked about here was the NEP program. The IMF suggested that rationalizing expenditure, specifically recommended that the government redesign the NEP program, which is the National Employment Program, and recalibrate housing initiatives with stricter eligibility and cost recovery mechanisms. So the IMF basically told them, you cannot give away you cannot give people houses and apartments. You have to figure out how to sell it to them, so that you can get back the money. But our government is so tricksy that they want to give people things to make them dependent on the government. The IMF told them, do not give away more houses. Did you ever hear our Prime Minister talk about that? So in closing, I want to tell you, be careful. And if you ever want a good read, figure out, go online and think of, ask the computer, what does the IMF think about Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit? And it literally, after you finish reading it all, tells you the IMF does not trust Mr. Roosevelt Skerrit or his government. So I'm just going to tell you that is what it says on the computer, and that is not AI telling you that. So good night, everybody.
All right, Andy. No, Thompson. Well, Andy has given you some food for thought to add to your final remarks.
Well, Andy has done it. I mean, with that kind of closing, he touched on all of the things that people need to live there with. The fact that this government is a failed government. And I think what he's done really very well is to establish why we need to change this government. And even Dr. Dion mentioned that. And I think everybody's thinking along those lines. After 25 years of malgovernance, it is more than enough time to get rid of this government, you know. And thanks, Dr. Dion, for that quote as well, from Thomas Jefferson. You know, you overthrow your government by choosing a new government when you're faced with a situation as we have faced in Dominica. What I would like to add in closing as well is another very important point that was raised in the report, having to do with the fact that the banking system is awash in liquidity. What I mean is by that, there is money in the banking system, but nobody getting loans. They ain't lending. Credit is uneven. Credit to the private sector is falling. Private sector companies cannot access funds. Private households cannot access funds to build homes, and in some cases where they could have, they have been given free housing. So all of that is made worse by the fact that you have a very high non-performing loan ratio. I think it's as high as 75%, where loans are not being repaid, and people are not repaying the loans, not because they're bad people, but they simply do not have the income. They simply do not have the revenues to repay those loans. When you think that our wages have been stagnated for so long, I mean, in 2026, individuals are still making $1,000 a month. When I worked in Dominica as a high school teacher, in the 1980s, I was drawing the same amount or just about the same salary that a teacher is drawing today. And you're talking about over 40 years later. How is that even possible? You know, that in terms of the amount, in terms of the value of what I was being paid then and what is being paid now. So very little changes in terms of the upliftment of the people, very little improvement in the outlook of the country. No wonder we are ranked at 187 out of 191 in the world. As my parents would say, no one panai as a country, thanks to this government. And I think the eyes of the Dominican public, thankfully, have been opened. And they will now think, quite frankly, that this government, its time is up and it needs to go. Time is up. Time to go.
Well, thanks a lot, Dr. Fontaine. Now, Dr. Andre, you have the final word.
Yes. Again, let me congratulate all the panelists. I think their respective presentations were superb. Let me thank Lambie for his diligence and showing in the background for his patience. And let me thank those who've listened throughout or partly through this program for their diligence and their dedication to enlightenment and to get a better understanding and appreciation of Dominica and the peril that confronts it as we speak. There's no question that it's a peril. There's no question that it's an economic cancer. There's no question that the IMF, in veiled language, in diplomatic language, is saying, you guys are in trouble. The ship of state is being run aground by unscrupulous leaders. And that is basically where we are. Again, you cannot talk about tightening belts when your own stomach is boasting and bloating because of the manner in which you live on the backs of the people. Make no mistake about that. You cannot be boasting about foreigners exporting $120,000 annually out of the country while your own folks are unemployed and have to be sitting down by the market or on the bay, smoking the wrong things, if I may say, and wondering when is the next job going to appear on the horizon. You cannot take solace in the fact that you are building hotels, that you are building multi-million-dollar mansions when your own folks cannot even afford a 2-bedroom home. You cannot boast about foreigners building apartment buildings throughout Dominica when the stench of poor construction besieges people and send them to hospital. You cannot talk about how well Dominica is doing, where quite frankly, you have ensured a situation where your island is drowning in debt. It is true that a drowning man will snatch at anything to save himself. But in this case, Dominicans should look inwardly and realize that whoever is bold enough to dream of a better Dominica, they have to look deep within the corridors of governance, and they have to realize that the enemy is within, not without. And to the extent that they do, to that extent, they will get the courage to take matters into their own hands to rescue themselves. They will not have to talk about or lament about the whole question of confirmation. They will ensure that the whole process is inundated by those seeking change. They will be inspired by what just happened in Hungary. They will be inspired by what happened in St. Vincent. And hopefully they will be inspired by the change they can make for themselves and for their children. So on that note, we have to keep it up or leave it right there. And I would like to end on a positive note that regardless of how dire and dismal things appear, and I know we sound like a broken record, Dominicans will eventually and ultimately decide that enough is enough. Nupa Nuse Muntu, we have to count. We have to rescue ourselves. We have to. Can you imagine with all these hundreds of millions of dollars hidden in secret accounts, as Zampoli told us, being showered on Dominica like confetti? Can you imagine where we would be as a country? That is what we should use to inspire ourselves, the opportunities for self-improvement and for self-advancement. So on that note, I say good night, and I wish everyone well in their future days.
Yes, thanks a lot, Dr. Andre. And let me also say good night to all these wonderful folks who stayed with us on Facebook and on YouTube and on the radio, in their cars, in their homes, in their offices, on the internet. And say good night, of course, to all our panelists, to you, Dr. Andre, to Dr. Dion George, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, Andy Jolly, and Marceline Edwards. Thank you so much for your, tremendous contribution to this program tonight. And I just wish everybody a very, very pleasant night indeed. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much. Good night, folks.
Good night.
Great job.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good night. Good night.
The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from. Understanding our past. Embracing our present. Charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty. Embracing justice, peace, and togetherness. The Global View on Q. Network.